Thanks, Kim. Got it. Okay. Thank you, Kim. My sister, Laura, who might be on this Zoom just now or just jumped in, loaned me Sarah's book this summer. And both my wife, Lori, and I read it, and we were both thrilled and fascinated with Sarah's adventures and her storytelling ability and just her accomplishments with what she did. So immediately I thought, wow, this would be an excellent virtual book discussion with NLI. And fortunately, when I reached out to Sarah to see if she'd join us, she said yes. And we worked out a date, and a few emails later, and we're here. So thank you so much, Sarah. Sarah's journey, and she's had many adventures as you read the book, not just bicycling 10,000 miles following the monarchs, but she's done a number of different adventures. Sarah is a founder of Beyond a Book. I'm reading from the book cover, which fosters lifelong learners, boundary pushers, explorers, and stewards. She works in amphibian research, and if you've read the book, you may have noticed she rescued a number of frogs on the road. And as an outdoor educator, guiding young people into nature so they can delight in its complicated brilliance. I'm a former educator working with high school students, and I love to see that the youth of our country and of our world are the future, definitely. She hopes her adventures walking from Mexico to Canada, canoeing the Missouri River from source to sea, and cycling over 80,000 miles across North and South America, including the monarch migration trip, will empower young and old to dream big. So with that, I'll leave it to, and I'd like to welcome and introduce Sarah Dykman.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for tuning in tonight. I just finished, about 2 weeks ago, I just finished my first in-person book tour, and I went from Kansas City to Mexico on a motorcycle, and I gave a lot of presentations, and you'll be happy to know I haven't talked in English in 2 weeks, and so my presentation and what I have to say is a little more fresh, so that'll be good. And yeah, I'm happy to talk about the monarchs. In case I run out of time, I got to thank Mark for making this happen, and of course Kim too for organizing all the logistics. I have met so many people, and oftentimes I'm in front of a group talking about monarchs, and I'm thinking, I have no idea how I got here, and like I have all these connections and all these friendships that have been born from my bike tour, and I really forget how they happen. But the short answer to all is it's always the monarch. The monarch has connected me to so many people, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm going to talk more about that. So tonight, what I want to do is talk about bike touring and my bike tour, and then about monarch ecology, and try and tell some stories to kind of help you see the world as I see it. And so with that, let me share my screen, because presentations are more fun with photos. So that's my book, Bicycling with Butterflies, and this is a picture of me on my bike tour. And my bike tour was back in 2017. It's been a while, but here I am still talking about monarchs, still loving monarchs, and they're still leading me on adventures. And at the end, I'll talk about why I'm in Mexico, but it's definitely because of monarchs. But first, I have to break your heart. I'm really sorry. The first thing I have to do is tell you that I like frogs way more than I like butterflies. Sorry. I know. In the summers, I work as an amphibian biologist catching frogs. The thing about frogs, besides the fact that they're amazing, is that they don't travel a very large distance. And the toad in this picture that I'm holding is a Yosemite toad, and their range is a very small portion of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. And so if I had wanted to follow them on a bike, it would have taken probably a day. If I'd wanted to walk, it would have taken maybe a week, but it wouldn't have been much of a very long of a trip. And I could have potentially gone the whole day, the whole 7-day walk without seeing someone. unlike the monarch butterfly, which the monarch butterfly lives where people live, and they spread out through pretty much for all of the United States. And every single day that I was following the monarch, I was meeting people and I could talk to them about the monarch. And that was really the goal of my trip, was to be a voice for the monarch and to remind people that this very incredible insect passes over our heads, and that all we have to do, we don't have to go to Yosemite National Park, we don't have to go on a safari in Africa. All we have to do to be part of this incredible phenomenon is just look up. And the other thing, of course, we have to do is plant milkweed. So I can't tell a story about monarchs without telling the story of milkweed. And in this picture, this is a male monarch. You can tell because he has these scent glands on, or scent pouches on his hind wings there. He's nectaring from one species of milkweed called swamp milkweed. Now there's about 70 species of milkweed native to the North America. And the monarchs will use about half of them with regularity to lay their eggs. And female monarchs will only lay their eggs on milkweed. It is the only food source of the monarch caterpillar. And if there is no milkweed, there can be no monarchs. Now, of course, in this picture, it's a male. Surprise, he's not laying eggs. He is nectaring. So the other important part of monarch conservation is that we need to give monarchs milkweed so that they can lay their eggs and have their host plant, but we also need to plant as many nectar flowers as we can, preferably native nectar flowers when possible, so that these adults can power their migration. And when I was on my motorcycle tour this fall, I was so distraught at how few flowers there were because of the drought, because of development. And then you'd see that last roadside ditch with some flowers, and then you'd see, oh, it's getting mowed. And so a lot of the talk of conservation is just about understanding the animal and their ecology, and then kind of making what we need work within their lives. So a good example would be mowing. Let's mow right before the monarchs come so that the plants can emerge, they can lay their eggs. Let's not mow when it's peak monarch season wherever you are. And that varies, of course, depending on where you are in the country. But the cool thing is that the monarch lives with us, and we can live with them as long as we kind of think about them when we're making choices. And I'm gonna talk way more about that. But first, in case there's some folks here that don't know much about monarchs, let me just do a little bit more of the basics. This is their range map where they live. Of course, they're migratory, so it's color coded by season, this map. Yellow is where they spend the summer months, green is spring, orange is fall, and there's a few blue dots. And there's blue dots in California, and that's where the monarchs, mostly the monarchs that live west of the Rocky Mountains overwinter. And then there's a blue dot in Florida with a question mark, because this is sort of changing with climate change. But most of the monarchs that are born between the Rocky Mountains and the Atlantic Ocean all fly to this tiny blue dot in Mexico, which is where I am right now. And it straddles the state of Michoacan in Mexico. And you'll note the monarchs have a huge range in the summer and then a very tiny range in the winter. And that's why you get this. You get this clustering of monarchs that's so dense that like branches literally break from their weight. And the millions and millions of monarchs will come here. And I could talk for the next 40 minutes about how amazing it was to be here. I crossed Mexico in a day and a half on my motorcycle, which is pretty nuts, in order to arrive on October 28th. And then I saw my first monarch on Day of the Dead on November 2nd. And now today, when I was coming, I'm at a friend's house because I have no internet where I live, and I probably saw 10,000 on my way in here. So lots and lots of monarchs right now. And they come here to this spot in Mexico because it's like kind of the perfect temperature, not too cold that they freeze to death, not so warm that they metabolize all their fat reserves, flying around and then starve to death. Now, I guess what I should, when I was first starting my bike tour, pretty much on this day where I'm biking with the monarchs, I could tell you that about everything I knew could fit into a few pages of a book. I knew that they overwintered in Mexico, which is why I went to Mexico to start with them. And I knew that they did this incredible migration and that they needed milkweed. but mostly I just learned by doing. And so sometimes that went well, and sometimes you learn the hard way. A lesson I learned the first day, you'll see in this picture, there's a couple dozen monarchs flying alongside me. Well, fast forward like to mile 2 of my trip, 2 out of 10,000, and the road turned and went downhill, and the monarchs kept going into the forest. And it's like, oh yeah, monarchs don't follow roads. So when I say that I followed monarchs on my bike, or when I biked with butterflies, I wasn't literally biking with them, but that wasn't really the point. The point was to travel through their homelands, through their spring and summer and winter and fall range, and tell people to pay attention, and tell people that if we don't get our acts together, if we don't start to share this planet with these butterflies, we're going to lose this phenomenon, we're going to lose this migration, and like that's just unforgivable in my opinion. So like I said, I started biking, and this is the route I ended up doing. That red line is a 10,201 mile line. I started in Michoacan, like I said, and I went north up into Canada and then back. And that took about 8.5 months. Now you'll notice a lot of squiggles. When I left Michoacan, my route was literally go north, stop at my parents' house in Kansas City for a shower, go to Canada and come back. That was the route. I did not have a plan, but I didn't need a plan because I had everything I needed on my bike, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But what you'll notice on this map is lots of little squiggles. That's because as I started biking, people found out about my trip. They found out I wanted to be a voice for the monarch, and they would invite me to do presentations at schools or nature centers. And as best I could, I said yes, because yes is where the adventure really lied, is when you say yes. And also alone, I couldn't be very loud. I didn't have enough time to call media outlets and to bombard radio stations and to put out press releases and to put up flyers. I didn't have time for that. So if someone emailed me and was really, really excited about my trip, well, then I would do my best to use that energy and to take advantage of that opportunity. Now, like I said, even once I knew I was like, oh, I'm going to do a presentation in Wichita, Kansas, or whatever, there's usually still 3 or 4 days where I didn't have a plan. Other than that, I needed to get there on a certain day. But because I was on my bike, I didn't need to have a plan. So my bike gave me so much freedom because I had everything I needed on my bike. Now, this is a picture. By the way, this is common milkweed in the background, my absolute favorite. Maybe my favorite plant of all time. I am the biggest fan of common milkweed, and they're so beautiful. They smell so good, and monarchs love them. Milkweed. This is a little side detour chat. Milkweeds come in a variety of different toxicity levels, and some are not quite toxic enough to give monarchs their poisonous protection. So a monarch is bright orange as a warning to say, hey, when I was a caterpillar, I ate toxic milkweed, and I am now toxic. Some milkweeds are too toxic, and they can actually kill a caterpillar. And common milkweed is in that kind of that sweet zone of not too toxic, not too untoxic. So little detour to promote my favorite milkweed species there, common milkweed. But back to my bags. I have a drawing here. This is my bags unpacked. I'm trying to write a version of this book for 10-year-olds. I have been in Mexico 2 weeks and it's just impossible to concentrate here. There's lots of kids and lots of things happening all the time, but it's on my to-do list. But this is a picture for that book. And in the front bags, when I would talk to schools, I would describe my front bags as my office and my bedroom. So sleeping pad, sleeping bag, computer, journal, headlamp, stuff like that. And on the back, I had my toolbox, my kitchen. I carry about a day's worth of food, my tent, my rain gear, warm gear, some art supplies. And here's a joke. I didn't tell this joke much on my recent book tour, but I just remembered it. These boxes here, they're old kitty litter. If I back up, these are old kitty litter boxes. And my joke is They are refrigerators that keep food cold when it's cold outside. Yes, thank you. Anyway, so I had everything I needed, and yes, this all weighs a lot, so I would go slow, but I could cover 60 miles going very slow. That's very doable when you have all day to do it. And then during that 60 miles, I would eat when I was hungry, and I'd camp when I was tired. And this is a very classic camping spot. In 8.5 months, I never once paid to camp. I relied on like highway easements, on hiding in plain sight. This is my tent here, and this is a highway in Texas. And people are always scared for me, but like I've camped in campgrounds. I'm way more scared in the campground. Because if you want to mess with someone sleeping in the middle of the night, you're going to drive to a campground. You're not going to drive 40 miles out of town to see if there's someone camped behind a bush that no one's ever camped at before. So I never once felt scared camping this way. And I liked it because this is what the monarchs do. They can't look at a map and decide their route based on who's planted a garden. No, they're flying north. They're getting pulled using their internal compasses and their antenna. And then it becomes night and they got to have a place to stay. And so me needing to do that same thing kind of brings maybe a sense of humanity to this need to have a safe place to stay every night. And we can either help the monarchs do that or not. We can either offer them hospitality by planting the plants that they need in our yards or not. But what they need us to do is make sure that if they arrive to your house, that you have given them what they need so that they can have a good night. The other great thing about bike touring is it wasn't about butterflies all the time. Like I said, I love frogs. And on a bike, you're going the perfect speed, not so slow that 100 miles feels overwhelming, but not so fast that you cover that 100 miles in a couple hours. And so at the speed of a bike, I could stop. Well, first I could notice, and second, I could stop whenever I wanted and check out whatever creature crossed my path. So this little toadlet, I think, is the cutest creature of my trip. Here's most beautiful, little rough green snake, 100% harmless. I think that snakes are kind of in the same boat as wild yards. We have been trained to be afraid of wild, even when this wild snake could not hurt us if they wanted to. There's just absolutely no way the snake could hurt you. But we've been trained to be scared of snakes, just like we've been trained to see a yard that looks, quote, a little weedy or a little not perfectly manicured one species that's perfectly curated. We're scared. And so what the monarchs need us to do is to see the beauty in this more wild place and to question when we're scared of something, why? Why are we scared of that snake? Why are we scared of that yard that looks a little wild? The monarchs need us to do that. Here's an animal that actually scared me. I did not get sprayed by the skunk, but this is where adventures happen. You know, I could not predict where I was going to see a skunk. I couldn't predict, if they would spray me or not. But when you leave on a tour, when you leave on your bike, when you leave your house, like when you put yourself out there, well, the adventure will come to you. I sometimes regret I didn't get sprayed by the skunk because it would have made a very good story, like a year later. Another encounter I had a lot, and because I was on a bike, I was able to participate in, was encounters with people. So I guarantee that this man would not have stopped if I'd been in a plane, obviously, or a bus or a car, or even my motorcycle. Like it takes going slow, being like really exposed to the world to get these offers of hospitality. And I'll admit, when I first saw this man pull up next to me, my first reaction was like, I'm gonna pretend I don't see him, which is like very obviously not true. Because I just wanted to get where I was going and I didn't want to talk to anyone and it was hot. But then he stopped and I stopped because what choice did I have? And he's like, hey, do you want some ice cream? And again, I couldn't predict this. I couldn't make this happen, but simply by going out and then being vulnerable and stopping when opportunities come, I was able to have this story. And I do not remember the miles before this or the miles after this, but I remember this moment because I was vulnerable and because I was able to say yes. Now, I ate a lot of ice cream on my trip. This was some like a random roadside encounter with ice cream, but like I said, people started reaching out to me and they started inviting me to their houses. And in the end, I ended up staying with 68 different families on my trip. Most of them were strangers to start. Some of them still are strangers. Like they showed me where, or they told me where Hidden Key was, and I never met them. But I choose to tell this story in Canada because it's another example of how the Monarchs and I were sharing not just the route, but the experience of being a traveler. Because in this picture, this is Margaret, and I showed up to her dairy farm and she said, "Hey, do you want some homemade ice cream for my dairy cows?" And I said, "Yes." And then, okay, so in this picture, Margaret is feeding me, and then that behind her is her backyard. And who is she feeding but the Monarchs? And so again, the Monarchs are just travelers that need our hospitality. They need us to invite them in for a safe place to stay and a meal. And for the Monarchs, that means milkweed, and that means native nectar plants. Now, I told this presentation, I've given a presentation in one way or another about this a lot. And on my bike tour, a woman came up to me like literally about to cry because I'd only told a story about getting ice cream in Mexico and Canada. And she was certain that no one in the US had given me ice cream, and she was ashamed to her countrymen. And I was like, no, I can't put a picture of every ice cream cone I've eaten. It would be a 5-hour presentation. But in honor of that moment, I put in this picture, and this is Erica and Lynn. And I love this story because I met them in Mexico. They were just travelers like me, and we went and saw one of the sanctuaries. And they said, "Oh, we live in New York." And I said, "I'm gonna bike to New York." And they were like, "Oh, sure you are. Here's our number, call us." And I'm like I'm like 90% sure they never expected to hear from me. But what do you know, like 4 months later, I call up Erica and I'm like, "I'm coming over, get ready." And so Erica, who's on the left, I think, whatever, I don't know how Zoom works. She let me stay at her apartment for a few days, and then Erica in the middle, she took us out for lunch, and then at the end of lunch, she said, "We got to go get ice cream and a fish." And I was like, that sounds disgusting, but you got to say yes. And so this is me eating ice cream and a fish. And I stole a picture from the internet to better showcase the beauty of this ice cream. So it's like this Japanese craze, and it's like this really awesome sesame, like soft serve ice cream in these soft fish shaped cones. And it was so good. And this is just like one of a billion examples of experiences I've had because I gave my time and my energy and my voice to the Monarch. And so I just love the idea that the Monarchs said thanks to me in a million ways during my trip. And this was one of them. Now, like I said, Monarchs don't eat ice cream. The adults eat nectar. And in the fall, especially, nectar is so important because the Monarchs that are here now, hopefully, and it seems unlikely to me, but hopefully, fingers crossed, they drank so much nectar that they have arrived fat enough to live off of that fat reserve all winter. And yeah, we can talk more about that if people have questions, but with climate change, that's getting more and more precarious and more worrisome. But Monarchs need nectar, especially in the fall, and they need milkweed. And this is a perfect example of my trip, 10,000 miles of me looking for milkweed. Maybe you've spotted the milkweed in this picture. And then jumping off my bike, full steam ahead. There's no time to break, to dive into this ditch and look around. And I spent hundreds of hours crawling around roadside ditches and discovering really incredible details that you only know from stopping and just exploring. And so here's an example of some milkweed, And here's a fifth instar caterpillar. I'm gonna zoom in on that guy. This was so cool. So when I was biking down the road, I didn't actually first see the caterpillar. What caught my eye first were these like black nuggets, which is the caterpillar poo, which scientists call frass. And then I stopped and I watched this caterpillar do this incredible thing where they would take their frass and they'd throw it over the leaf as if they're like cleaning the leaf. And my guess is to kind of to make sure that just like I noticed or I cued in on the fact that a caterpillar was there because of the frass, other predators could do the same. So I'm guessing it's a way of just a defense mechanism. The other really cool thing you'll notice, all the leaves kind of shoot up except for the leaf that this caterpillar's on. And that's because this caterpillar actually chewed the vein of the leaf. And what that did was that is a behavior that stops the flow of the milky latex that gives the milkweed its name. So if you tear a leaf of a milkweed, this milky latex sap oozes out, and that is a defense for the plant. The glue can actually glue shut the mouths of caterpillars and other herbivores, and it's also toxic. So it's poisonous. Most herbivores will avoid milkweed. The monarchs, however, have figured out ways to store that poison in them, and also ways to prevent getting huge mouthfuls of the sap, including big fifth instar caterpillars will chew the vein of the leaf. So this is like two like National Geographic worthy behaviors. Like this information belongs in like a video. It's so interesting. And I'm just going to back up and remind you, this is happening 1 foot from a paved road, I think in Indiana. So you don't have to go far to have adventures with amazing animals doing amazing things. You just have to pay attention. Now, the problem with paying attention is I fell in love with these animals. I fell in love with milkweed. I fell in love with monarchs. The more I learned about them, the more I loved them. The more I knew about them, the more I saw the world through their eyes. And so the more mad and the more angry and the more sad I got, because there were miles and miles and miles of me seeing that humans are just taking and taking, and they're not thinking about anyone but themselves. And this isn't sustainable. This isn't going to work. And I would show up at a presentation after having biked past all these roadside ditches, and in a lot of places, especially in the Corn Belt and the upper Midwest, this is the last habitat the monarchs have because we have plowed almost every other square foot of their land. And so I would see this. I would see that we're destroying what was left of the monarch's home without thinking, and I was so mad. And people would expect me to show up at a presentation and be like, I love butterflies, woohoo. No, I showed up mad. And I showed up angry, and I showed up wanting to just like cry and give up. And I think the biggest lesson I learned is that we have to be angry. If we are not angry about the situation that we have put the monarchs in, that we put future generations of humans and of non-humans and of all of us in, if we're not angry, then we're not noticing, and we're not doing our job of taking notice. But we can't just be angry. And if I had only been angry, I would have had to give up, because it would have destroyed me. So my book and my trip became about finding a balance between this hope and anger. And I wasn't very good at it all the time, but we need to find this balance. And we need to, well, here's more examples of how I got angry, and I can talk about them more in a second, but we need to, because this is the future the monarchs have right now. This is a graph of their population over time. And basically in December, when the monarchs are the most colonized, or the most densely clustered, I should say, scientists in Mexico will count how much area they take up. So the more area monarchs take up, the more monarchs there are. The less monarchs there are. So we had some good years back in the early 90s with lots and lots of monarchs, lots and lots of space, but you can see basically this downward trend. You'll notice that there's lots of ups and downs, but in general, it's a downward trend line. And that is 100% because of habitat loss and climate change. If there's no milkweed for the monarchs, well, then there's going to be no eggs, and there's going to be no caterpillars, and there's going to be no adults. The good news is, because monarchs lay lots of eggs, if there is a good year, well, if a female lays 500 eggs, and if she has 500 milkweeds to lay them on, then chances are 3 or 4 of them will survive. And the monarch migration is multi-generational. So 3 or 4 of those will survive to the next generation, which will also lay 500 eggs per female. And hopefully, if there's enough milkweed, 3 or 4 of those will survive. And then basically what you'll see is every generation, the population could potentially double if there's enough milkweed. But milkweed is the name of the game. And this green line that is on this graph shows this green line is where we'll have a stable population of monarchs, so that if there's a storm in Mexico that kills 80% of the monarchs, which has happened, or if there's a drought in Kansas, in the Midwest, when fall nectar plants are the most important, well, there'll still be enough monarchs to start that doubling every generation and recover the population quickly. So monarchs can recover, but only if there's milkweed. And in order to get to this line, this stable population line, scientists right now are saying we need to plant 1.8 billion stems of milkweed. 1.8 billion. It's a lot of milkweed. It's not going to happen by us waiting for national parks and state lands, even nature centers, to get on board. The only way we're going to get 1.8 billion stems of milkweed in the ground is if every single person looks around and finds a place where they can put milkweed in the ground. And that's often at your house or your school or your farm, but every person can find a place to put some milkweed in the ground. And that's how we're going to save this population, by planting the plants that they need and sharing the planet with them. I'm going to back up to this picture. This is an example of not sharing. In these examples, I guarantee you there's no one's having a picnic here, no one's frolicking here. Like, we simply just decided, oh, the best thing to do is cut everything down and mow it and spray it and then water it and then fertilize it. This is not what being a good neighbor is, because we have to think not just about our human neighbors, but our butterfly neighbors and our frog neighbors and our snake neighbors and our skunk neighbors, and we have to share. And right now in these pictures, we are sharing nothing. And if we can't learn to share, then we're going to lose these animals, and it's just not okay. We have to learn to share. This was all their land, and we stole it all, and we have to share. And it sounds intense, and it's like, I can feel myself getting angrier and angrier, but like I said, we have to be angry. We have to share, but we also have to remember that, like, it's working. People are learning to share. And that was why I kept going on my trip. Even when I saw like where this population was trending, even when I would bike hundreds and thousands of miles through places where people just mow, take. I still found people that were doing things differently and giving me hope. And I found hope in 2 ways. One was doing something. I don't care what you're doing, do something. It doesn't matter, even if it works. Hope is being an example of trying brings hope to other people, and so they'll go out and try. So as long as you're trying, that's all that matters. Try. For me, trying meant giving the monarchs my voice. And then the other thing that gave me hope, of course, was doing something and was meeting other people that were doing something. So I met teachers planting gardens. If you can get a school garden going, it's so much work. They're so hard to keep maintained and to deal with administrators, but if you can, it's so valuable. And I think every single kid in the world deserves to go outside and explore and find an animal that exists only because of the decisions they made, and that decision to share the land with other animals and plants and be part of the solution. Like, the world is so full of problems, but the monarch is so beautiful in the fact that they have such an easy answer, and it's anyone can dig a hole and plant a plant. And like, if you can do that, well, then maybe you can do the next step. That might be a little harder, but you can always go back and remember, I'm already part of the solution because I'm returning and because I'm sharing these plants with monarchs. So get those gardens in the ground, Um, I was gonna say, sometimes I think people don't quite understand what I want to say about this, but I'm gonna mention it anyway. I often heard people say like, oh yeah, like kids give me so much hope for the future. Look at all these kids, they love nature. And I try actually not to say that, because I think we need to make it abundantly clear that it is not kids' jobs to give adults hope. It's adults' job to give kids hope, which means the adults need to be out there changing, trying, proving to the kids that solutions do exist. So the hope that I found was that when the teachers giving these kids hope, or in scientists older than me that have devoted their lives to taking care of monarchs. And I mean, the most obvious example of this is Dr. Chip Taylor out of Kansas City University's Monarch Watch program. They just celebrated 30 years of him giving his time and his energy and his voice and his money to monarchs. And it started with a tagging program that then turned into citizen science, and then education and conservation. And I draw an enormous amount of hope from Chip Taylor. And yeah, I hope I can give that hope to the next generation too. Another bit of hope that I found on the road was at the Neiman's farm in Junction, Texas. I actually told this whole story. I'm gonna tell you, I told this whole story like a month ago, and I didn't know that Bill and his wife Jan were in the audience because they came in late and it was dark. And so I went on and on about how amazing they were. And I told the story about Bill, who started his career in the 80s planting non-native grass as a landscaper. And he would water and fertilize and cut and do all the things that we need to do to maintain a lawn, because non-native grasses typically have very shallow roots, so they can't access water. They're not equipped to deal with a Texas summer per se. And so, but then he would drive home and he'd see a flower in the field, and he'd think, how is this beautiful flower existing without anything, any help from humans? And he learned, well, natives have really long, deep tap roots, so they can persist even in a Texas drought. And so he slowly transitioned his landscaping work to native plants. And now he owns and operates Native American Seed with his family, and they cultivate natives, harvest the seeds, and then sell those seeds so other people can convert their yards or their land to natives. So inspiring, such a good example of change. And I'm so glad I didn't know he was in the audience when I told all that, because I mean, he's a hero. His family is really amazing, and I'm really grateful for them. A little bit more hope, and this is a golf course. And if we can find hope in a golf course for native plants, then anything is possible. And this is a great example, again, of sharing. So we still can golf, but the rough was all converted to native prairie. And so they save money on fertilizer, on water, and they're sharing the planet with monarchs so that the next generation can also be amazed by a butterfly flying to them from another country. Lots and lots of hope was found for me in yards. And this is one of hundreds of gardens that I've seen across the North America, where people are beginning to plant natives and share their yards with native wildlife. This garden, when I first showed up, I was like, oh, I was expecting like this, like wild. But then my friend Amy was like, oh, I've already found 30 eggs on these milkweed plants. And you start to think, wow, if only one of those eggs survives, that could be the difference between a butterfly that you see or not. That could be 500 more eggs in the next generation. That could be thousands of more eggs by summer. And so every garden matters. And in this example, this is a good example again of sharing. You can still have grass, you can still have a patio, you can still have ornamentals, but we got to start putting those natives back in the ground. And if you want to go big, please go big and showcase the natives in the front yards. Like, they're beautiful. And I think by showcasing the beauty of natives and showcasing a wilder landscaping, we can change hearts and minds, and we can be that example. So this is Nadia. She lives in Columbia, Missouri, and you can see where her property line ends, and you can see her neighbors mow. But here's some common milkweed jumping up in her neighbor's yard, and I asked about it, and she said the neighbors used to mow everything, and then they learned if there's no milkweed, there's no monarchs. So now they mow around this little patch of milkweed. And it's not much, but it's one step closer to that 1.8 billion we need. And this milkweed would not exist without this example here. So we need a brave person on every single street to break status quo, to be brave, to challenge the norm, and to say, no, we can do better. We have to do better. We have to learn to share. And so if you can be that example, the butterflies need you to do that. Another good example of front yard garden, this is Val's garden in Joplin, Missouri. And it's great because you'll notice she like mowed a very distinct path. So her front yard was like, I want to say like about 50-50 native grass. So the very purposeful boundary line kind of helped show her intention of like, this is a garden to the neighbors. And the other nice piece of advice I have is put a sign up. And if the neighbors know you're doing this for monarchs, well, that'll help. And on my motorcycle trip, I stopped again at Val's house, and I was looking by her mailbox at her natives, and I saw 2 monarchs that had just eclosed that she didn't know had been there. They'd crawled off her milkweed and they'd metamorphosed in her yard, and they were about to fly to Mexico. And I just looked at them and just was like kind of overwhelmed by the realization that they only existed because of Val. Like the only reason they were alive was because she decided to share. And that's so powerful to look up at the sky here and think, wow, does that butterfly exist? Like, why does that butterfly exist? And it's usually because someone decided to share. It doesn't have to be a yard. This is a parking lot. Again, if golf courses and parking lots can be a home for a monarch, then there's no excuse. Or the other proof is I was biking in across the Brooklyn Bridge, and then I went down into Manhattan and I saw this monarch. So if a monarch can live in New York City, they can live anywhere. And I think that's the beauty of the monarch, is you don't have to be rich. You don't have to own a lot of land. You don't have to be able to leave work and travel for 2 months on a safari. All you have to do, no matter where you live in the United States, is plant some native plants in your yard and they will show up. It's so powerful. It's so beautiful. And when they show up, I think maybe the most important lesson that I have is that the more that you give to them, the more you'll get back. So that when they show up to your yard, they're bringing beauty. They're saying thanks by bringing beauty and awe to your life. And so I'm gonna run through just a few examples of the gifts that monarchs have given me. Of course, the first being beauty. This is a male monarch, again, nectaring on what we call butterfly weed. I saw someone in the chat said it was their favorite milkweed plant. They're popular milkweed for landscaping because they tend to not spread as much, and look, they're very beautiful, and they bloom in the fall, which when other plants might not be blooming. So I agree, they're very beautiful. Another gift that they give you is the gift of noticing. So you fall in love with this bright orange, beautiful butterfly that's impossible to ignore. And then you want to learn about their caterpillars. And you aren't going to spot this little tiny caterpillar going 60 miles an hour down the highway. No, you're only going to spot this caterpillar by slowing down. And then when you slow down, they're going to thank you by teaching you science. So in this picture, this caterpillar showed me how first they actually will shade the leaves of hairy milkweeds. So that shiny bit is where they bit off all the hairs of the leaf. And then what they did after that is they chewed a trench in the leaf to drain that milky latex, and then they ate the peninsula or the middle bit. And like, it is a gift to know that, because it's like, it feels like a secret. It feels like wow, well, so much cool stuff is happening on this little tiny plant. And like, to be amazed is a gift. And then of course you'll get the gift of meeting all the other animals that need milkweed. These are milkweed tussock moths. They're so amazing. I want to like make a brand of carpet inspired by them. I call them the carpet moths, but that's for another day. But
Hey,
they also
Sarah?
need milkweed.
Oh,
Yeah,
Sarah, I just want to say it's about 7 minutes to 7. So if you want to wrap up pretty soon and maybe in the next few minutes, and then we can have time for questions and answers.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, we'll still have 45. We have 45 minutes still, right?
Well, we could,
Said
yes.
7:30.
7:30, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Another gift the monarch gives you is noticing even the animals that you might not have thought are worthy or maybe are harder to love. I think it's worth mentioning that a monarch will lay 500 eggs. We want 495 of those to be food for the spiders and the ants and the wasps so that they can feed the birds and the skunks and the frogs that we love. So if you plant milkweed in your yard and they get eaten, like look up to the sky and be like, oh, I fed that bird. That's awesome too. And when you help the monarchs, you're also helping the frogs. And so if after all this, you're like, yeah, monarchs don't do it for me, that's okay. Like pick the animal that matters to you. Pick the animal that brings you joy or the plant, and give your time and your energy and your vote and your money and your yard to that animal, and you'll be saving all the others too, even the frogs. And another gift that the monarch gives us is connection. Like I have met so many friends on my trip. This is Brianda. She was my guide in Mexico. I now live at her mom's house. A couple years ago, I was at her wedding, only because I took that leap and I did this adventure with monarchs. And the last lesson that I have, and I think it's the most important, is that the monarchs remind us that small equals big. So here's monarchs in Mexico. This branch is literally bent from the weight of butterflies. One butterfly might not seem like it matters, but they add up something big, something powerful. So too does our work. So too do our garden. So too does our efforts. And so too does our voice. One monarch I can't hear. When 10,000 are flying above me, it creates this beautiful humming sound, just like us. My voice alone isn't going to amount to much change, but if we all tell someone, that matters. So you don't have to quit your job and go get lost in Mexico, although I recommend it. All you have to do is plant that milkweed. Full disclosure, the milkweed in this picture died. It's not easy. There's a learning curve. Start small, keep trying, embrace the failure as part of the adventure. But eventually the true adventurers will come to you, and they'll reward you like I mentioned, and they'll bring you joy and friendships and all these things that are so important and so necessary. And that's what the monarchs are continuing to do for me. So I'm just going to point out two adventures the monarchs are leading me on right now. First, this is a new cover to my book. So my book is doing well enough that the publisher is coming out with a paperback version. On this paperback version, I've got the seal that for winning the National Outdoor Book Award, which feels like a gift from the monarchs. And one day in my email inbox, I got an email with some beautiful words from Dr. Jane Goodall. And again, just proof that when you give your time and your energy, you'll be rewarded. And the other adventure, the venture I'm on right now in Mexico, is I started a project in 2020 where women that live near one of the colonies called El Rosario count monarchs from their home 3 times a day. And I've been running around training women the last few weeks and installing thermometers, and it's really awesome. Like today I got emails or phone calls from a couple women that were like, oh, there's 1,000 streaming right now. And like, it's been really fun to empower women to have jobs and be scientists and provide funds. So on my book tour, a lot of my book tour is about raising money. There's a GoFundMe link here if you want to jot that down and share what you can. And all the money at this point is going to pay these women. So those are the adventures. That's the book, and I'm happy to take any questions there are, if there are any.
Thank you, Sarah. That was so fascinating and so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. I have one question. Earlier in the presentation, I was just curious about logistical things like you had the photo of the caterpillar and the milkweed and you were jumping off your photo. How did you stage that photo? Who took that photo?
Well, first I saw the caterpillar and I jumped off my bike, and then after a while I had a tripod and I set it up and reenacted for the sake of
Oh,
telling a story. So
okay,
yeah, I used a tripod a lot.
that's cool. That's cool. I like that. All right, any other questions?
Well, I'd say that we used to have a lot of milkweeds on the farm, and during the war, we would gather the ripe seeds with the parachutes on them, and that was donated to the government for use in KPOC life vests. They stuffed
Right.
those life vests with that material, and that's
And
what
it-
we called KPOC.
Yeah, and I think about that story a lot, and I think, if a friend gave you something off their back so that you could win a war or survive on a boat, and then your thanks was to poison the land so that no more milkweed could grow, like what does that say about us? And so I think we need to see the gifts that the milkweed is bringing us, and not consider them a weed, and not ruthlessly poison them and evict them from the land, but to acknowledge that they're important and they're helpful, and they bring us gifts, and that we need them, and that they helped us and we need to help them. But yeah, it's a beautiful story, and I mean, everyone has played with milkweed. You call them parachutes, or some people call them floss, milkweed floss. Oh, they're so fun to play with.
Well, I had quite a few of them growing in my house yard, my farm house yard, when I don't live there, and somebody stole my mower that I mowed my yard with. And I hired a neighbor to help mow when I couldn't. And he ended up mowing all of my milkweeds I had growing.
Well, common milkweed is pretty resilient, so they'll probably pop back up again. But yeah, if people don't know, then they mow.
There's
Sarah, I
some,
have, oh,
there's a red beetle that has black spots on it that eats milkweed
Milkweed beetle.
leaves too. And when you pick
Yeah.
that beetle up, it'll sing.
I haven't never heard him sing, but yeah, I've seen a lot of them. There's quite a few insects that rely on milkweed. Those guys usually eat the pods. So there's different specialists for different parts of the plant.
Ashley has a question.
Yeah, thank you. I was just, in your advocacy, if you've seen, you have a lot of the photos of the easements and the highways getting mowed, and just curious if you've found groups or have had any success with working with groups, whether it's the energy companies or the highway departments, of interactions with them and like messages that stick with them to help convince them that they shouldn't be putting their resources into mowing those spaces.
Yeah, the DOT, the Department of Transportation in each state have kind of turned their focus to how to manage the roadsides. The issue that they come across is a lot of people that don't know better complain when they don't mow. So what we need is, and if anyone knows how to make an app, I'm looking for someone to help me make an app where you can, wherever you are, if you see roadside unmowed, you can go on the app and know exactly who to call to say thanks, because we need the voices that say, please don't mow. We need you to not mow, to kind of, to be louder than the voices saying, oh, you gotta mow, it looks weedy, it looks bad. It only looks bad because we've forgotten how to see the world through the eyes of other creatures and have empathy. But yeah, so pushing those DOTs is really important. The other thing that's like happening recently since I published my book is, you might have heard the monarch was on the endangered species list. That's not true. They were listed on the IUCN endangered species list, and the IUCN is just a board of scientists, not just, but they're a board of scientists without any legislative power. That's basically just creating a report card for the world and the species. And looking at the literature, they said, yes, the migrating monarch, the subspecies of the migrating, that is the migrating monarch, is worthy of listing. So one of the things that the DOTs are doing is working with I think it's the Fish and Wildlife, because they're in charge of the listing. Fish and Wildlife is projected to make a determination if the monarch should be on the endangered species list. But right now they just got too many other species to deal with. But if the monarch is listed, then all of a sudden the DOTs are going to have federal regulation protecting the monarch. And so one of the things that's happening right now is I think it's the Fish and Wildlife are saying, if you start implementing best practices now, if the monarch is listed, we won't be as hard on you as if you just don't try and do anything now and wait until they're listed. And so best practices for the DOT, Monarch Joint Venture out of Minnesota. It's an amazing organization, great resources online, Monarch Joint Venture, check them out. And they have a mowing guide, and it's basically determines, depending on the region that you live in, when you should be mowing those ditches for best practices. And that's what the DOTs are using right now. But they need a reason to do it, because it's more work. Because if you can only mow in a 2-month period, it's way harder to get all those roads mowed than if you're just mowing for convenience sake alone, which is how they usually do it.
Okay, I think Pam had her hand up first, and then we'll go to Renee after Pam.
Oh, hi. Yes. Well, first of all, thank you, Sarah, for having such an adventurous spirit. You're very brave. But I had a question about the milkweed virus. We've noticed, we used to call one a milkweed hill, and we've noticed that, it was practically gone this year. There were a few, and some of the farmers' areas where we used to see a lot of milkweed. We wondered if it was the virus or weather.
When you speak about virus, you mean OE?
I'm not sure. That attacks the milkweed plant itself, and I don't know if it kills it. I thought it was a type of fungus, but I haven't researched it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. If someone else is, please jump in. I'll say that the native milkweeds, like this year, a lot of people saw them die back because of drought, at least in the Midwest. And so with these native plants, a lot of times if the conditions aren't right and they know they're not going to be able to make seeds or it's just not enough resources, they'll just kind of go dormant. The other thing is milkweeds often are a disturbance species. So if you think about the prairie that they evolved in, the bison would come through and mow them down, and then they would leave them alone for a decade while they kind of did their grazing regimes. Common milkweed, as best that we know, common milkweed used to not be common. It really only thrived in like animal burrows, like sites that had been excavated. Then the plow just basically changed the game for common milkweed. But without knowing the exact site or the exact species, my best guess is that it's probably either just like natural succession, and you need to go back in there and either burn or do something to kind of redisturb the soil and keep those disturbance species happy, or the drought, they just kind of senesced and are waiting for better conditions. But if someone can speak to the virus or more local idea, I'm happy to turn over the mic.
Thank you.
Okay, Renee.
Yeah, Sarah, I really enjoyed your book. So this year, I was recently retired, and I wanted to just try my hand because I had planted a lot of swamp milkweed, in my garden. And yes, they came. And I thought my goal was to just try and rear 3. And well, let's just say through many instances of me trying to save them because the mom laid them on a plant that was distressed or not enough food for them, I would save. And I ended up releasing it was about 63, I think. And this year it was very late. And even looking on Facebook with this monarch and what milkweed grew, you know, I don't know if it's climate change or what. This was my first go at it, but gosh, people were saying, and myself included, we were looking to release monarchs that were enclosing beginning of November. And I'm in Pennsylvania. So really, there's not a lot left. I have a lot of pollinators planted on my farm. But honest to gosh, I ended up driving the one like an hour and a half away. And I had my friend take it to Delaware with her just to give it a head start to Mexico. But the one thing, and I really did take away from your book, and you mentioned it here, and I think a good message, a very powerful message, is that it's the networking, the collaboration, the education. I've been Monarch Joint Venture has been putting on some very informative webinars, and one topic around the Milpa and the Mexican people and how, you know, their conservation of the land has really, you know, it's connected with the monarch. And, you know, I do think the way you had woven in so much education and information, in addition to your journey, your travels, was just brilliant. And I do think that the way Mexico has, I'll say, made it possible for those residents that were relying on that land for farming, et cetera, and to really respect now this forest land for the monarchs and, you know, giving them that allocation of monies and et cetera. So I just think, you know, that collective, the Monarch Joint Venture has really opened my eyes to all the partnerships across the states that exist, and really has inspired me because they have, like, for example, Utah Friends of Monarchs. And so I want to start for Pennsylvania and really start contacting our local parks and seeing if, you know, there can't be some sort of really more focused, diligent effort around this. But to your point, I just think the collaboration and really an organization like Monarch Joint Venture really enables that. So sorry, long-winded, but I just feel that there is so much power in those connections and networking that I see are out there. And I'm just like, wow, this is great. So thank you.
Yeah, there are a lot of awesome resources. Sometimes because people have monarchs, there's also a lot of bad information. So highlighting Monarch Joint Venture is a good way to go. They have lots of great stuff and lots of great resources to get something going. And yeah, like, that's the beautiful thing, is everyone can start a little something, and the monarchs need us to start a little something everywhere. And one of the cool things about the monarch is because they spread out, like, they're hedging their bets, right? They're hedging their bets that, well, if they all freeze to death in Pennsylvania, they'll have done better in Missouri. And because of that, again, they can recover. They can have a bad year one place as long as they have a good year somewhere else. And so, but the problem is, if we do all of our conservation efforts in one place, and that place has the bad year, well, then there's not a good place. So really, we need everyone to take responsibility for their little plot of land, their town, their city.
Agreed.
And make sure that if the monarchs come there and the weather's right, they'll have what they need. So
yeah, just because, I mean, between hurricanes coming late, it's just been very crazy with the weather. And so yeah, I agree. Thanks.
Yeah, good luck. Have fun.
In chat, there was a comment from Linda Zillman. She said, Sarah, have you read Mary Alice Monroe's book, The Butterfly's Daughter? It's another book that fills you with awe for these butterflies.
I haven't, but I'll keep my eyes out for it. Yeah, there's a lot. I think the book that has struck a chord with me the most that people might be interested in, it's not butterfly related, but if you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass, go out and read Braiding Sweetgrass. It's amazing.
That's,
It's Robin
Robin,
Wallkammer.
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Pam, your hand is still up. Do you have another question?
yeah, I was reading a while back about the avocado plantations kind of destroying some of the milkweed, the monarch territory down there in Mexico. Do you find that to be true or know anything about that?
I mean, from everything I've seen, the monarchs are at 10,000 feet and the avocados are at 8. So I could see the avocados possibly stealing water. Like all the water we drink is all just coming from the top of the mountains, mostly in like hoses or springs. And so if those avocados need water, that's just more water getting siphoned off the mountain. And I've heard like lots of pesticides, but the problem in Mexico is climate change and of course lack of resources. Of course, you're going to cut down a tree if you need a tree to cook your food. And until we can give people here opportunity, which is what I'm trying to do with my Monarch project, is they're gonna take from what they need from the forest. But there's more, there's another generation every 15 years. So I don't know how they're gonna solve that problem, honestly.
Okay. Thanks.
Mark, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Renee hit on one topic I was going to ask about was actually raising butterflies. I know you mentioned that in your book at one point in time and and how you evolved your opinion about that. And what do you think about that? And also, I noticed your biking gear was, you don't have the cushioned seats. Maybe you did, I don't know, but looked like cut off pants and stuff, and not a typical biker that you would see doing long distances, I guess. And if you could comment on how you chose what to wear and what to take and things like that.
Yeah, for the gear, I just made do with what I had. And also I'm biking slow and I want to go into a store not wearing a leotard, but that's my personal opinion or my personal preference. You don't need the latest, greatest gear. And I'm like, my bike was ugly. My panniers are made from kitty litter boxes. I'm wearing thrift store pants that I chopped the legs off of. Like, the Monarchs need us to be happy with less. And so I kind of just tried to lead by example and just make do with what I had. Then as far as rearing, like, I'm totally happy with people rearing some Monarchs. I think it's a good way to communicate the story and create connection. And especially if people have just started a garden, I think it helps motivate them to know that one or two of them, those caterpillars, are going to survive. The research right now is we're still figuring out the research. It sounds like reared monarchs likely are less likely to arrive to Mexico for whatever reasons. So natural selection is important. And for me too, I think it's important to remember that we need monarchs to get eaten so that we can feed the food web. So I want to discourage people from thinking that the way to save monarchs is to rear them. That's not how we're going to save them. The only way to save monarchs is to give a monarch 500 milkweeds so that she can lay 500 eggs and that 5 of them can survive. That's how we're going to save milkweeds or monarchs. And so one of the things I say is maybe make it a goal for every monarch you bring in, try and plant 10 milkweeds so that 10 eggs out in nature have a chance to do their thing, and maybe one of them will survive.
Along the lines of laying eggs, if I could continue that question, will another female lay eggs on the same milkweed that it already has eggs on, or an egg?
It just totally depends what their options are, right? So one of the things that you'll see is called egg dumping, is when a female will lay multiple eggs on one plant. That's not ideal. Caterpillars are eating machines. They start small, they'll eat the small leaves, and hopefully the plant will grow with their need. But if there's 10 caterpillars on one milkweed, forget about it. Those caterpillars are going to strip that milkweed, and if there's not another one nearby, they'll starve. So the females are looking for milkweeds that have less. And so what they'll do is they'll choose the smallest shoots possible. That's where the freshest leaves are. And then that likely means that there's not a big caterpillar on that plant yet. But I mean, I don't know if they can like sense, maybe someone in the audience knows if they can do this, sense another monarch on there. But I think just in the spirit of choosing smaller plants when possible, that kind of means that plant's only been up a few days, so there's likely not another monarch egg on there. But that's a good question. I'd have to dig a little more in if the monarch can avoid milkweeds with other caterpillars already on them.
All right, other questions?
This is your chance, people. You're talking to the author here.
Yeah.
How often does that happen?
All right, I have a question. Early on in your book, you said one of your first lessons talking to students that you learned from a teacher was not to use the word cool. So I've become very self-conscious about it. And I noticed tonight I've said it a couple times or more. So what did you come up with instead of saying cool? What other kind of words did you
Oh, you
think
can
of?
still say cool, but like, I don't know, the monarch migration is more than cool. You know, it's inspiring, it's exciting, it's long, it's far, it's multi-generational, it's multinational. I think just trying to describe why something is cool might be the next best thing, but you can still say something's cool. But why? Why is it cool?
Yeah, okay.
I guess-
Pam, I was just gonna say Pam in chat, Sarah has inspired me so much. I just decided to winter sow tuberosa butterfly weed and give one away free with each native plant we sell next spring. Oh, nice.
Yeah, I hope they grow. I was just thinking of another question. Now, I was under the impression that the Syriaca, the common milkweed, is rhizomatous, underground, and people say it's aggressive, of course, like they don't love it in their gardens, etc. I have it all around my house, wherever. But you'd think then it would be everywhere or something, instead of, I don't know, that there'd be.
Well, like I mentioned, they're a disturbance species. So if it's already a well-established flower bed, they're less likely to be able to get hold. And then of course, if you're mowing a lawn every other week or twice a week or whatever it is, you got to mow a lawn. They're not. That's going to be enough to stop them. Then they can't survive a mower. They might be able to survive underground, but they'll keep putting up shoots that won't go anywhere. But yeah, I love common milkweed for that.
And I have noticed, I mean, I'm in farm country too, corn everywhere, but I have noticed more in the past few years that the farmers they're aware of it, after these few years, decades, and seem to be mowing around the milkweed in some areas. But they're still mowing a lot of ditches too, yeah.
Yeah, there's incentives for farmers to leave no mow, no cultivation areas, especially riparian areas, so we don't lose our soil to our waterways. It's hard. I mean, the biggest problem with corn and milkweed is that most of the corn planted now is genetically modified, so it's able to survive after a herbicide spraying. So prior to the 90s, when GMOs became available, the farmers couldn't spray once the corn had emerged, which means that the milkweed was safe in the ditch in between the corn rows. But now the farmer can wait till the corn has emerged, and then they can spray and kill the milkweed, and the corn will survive. And so really overnight, pretty much in a few years, all the milkweed that grew in all those corn rows just disappeared. So I would love to see the government subsidize farmers to go organic and to switch crops. Right now, I mean, the corn and subsidies are a product of the Great Depression, and it feels like it's time to change for the sake of farmers and for the sake of butterflies, and hopefully we'll see that happen.
Hmm.
Sarah, there's a couple of thank yous in the comments or in the chat, I guess it's called. You can see those. So
Awesome. Yes, I'm looking at them. Yes. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Me just talking doesn't do much. So I need people to listen and care. And so I appreciate the thanks.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And I was so fascinated by what you were saying. I was losing track of time. And then I suddenly realized, wait, oh, we're getting close to 7 o'clock. I better say something. I do. So you're in Mexico right now. And how long are you there for? And then what are you working on? And what's your next adventure?
I don't know the answer to any of those questions.
Okay.
I've got a few possible things happening. I'm just waiting to see what door opens first and widest, I suppose. But I'll be here in some capacity till April, and
Okay.
I want to do a trip following frogs. I want to write the book that I started. The book that we're talking about now, but for 10-year-olds.
Okay.
I want to do a lot of things, and then today it was cold, and I just decided, you know what, I'm not even going to get out of bed till 9. so it's hard to live. The hardest thing about my life is it's all just on me. It's like I don't have a boss telling me what to do, so if I want to make it happen, I gotta just go do it. For better
I
or
think
worse.
one of the things I really admire about you is your openness to new experiences and adventure, and not just adventure, but just your openness to meeting new people and making new relationships and connections, and just it really is an enriching life, I think.
I mean, the greatest things I have in my life just have come from these having said yes. So that makes it easier to say yes when you remember all the times it worked out.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
it can be a little exhausting. Sometimes you just want to read a book by yourself in your house and not
Yeah.
talk to people, but I do that too.
Any other last questions before we wrap up? More thank yous in the chat.
Awesome.
well, I know some of the folks on this this call will see you in January with the Audubon group. So
All right.
When is,
Northwest.
yeah, tell us about that, Mark. When is it and how can we get information about that?
I know it's in January. I don't know the date, but I know someone that does. Laura.
Do I know the date? I probably do. I'm a definitely fly by the seat of your pants person.
Yeah, my sister's
Well,
on it.
January 3rd.
Yes. And it's either by Zoom or you can actually meet at the St. John's Church in Freeport. Well, no, it's UCC, anyhow, check out the Northwest Illinois Audubon Society website and all the information will be there.
Thank you, Laura.
Sorry, I don't have that handy. I should have had that handy.
And anybody can attend that?
Yes, yeah, you can, in person, you can, just show up. The meeting starts at 7, the program will be around 7:30. But if you want the Zoom link, you'll need to check the website and request that. I think that's gonna be the way that will be done. But
And
it will
Sarah-
be, she'll be zooming in, and so we can meet in person. It will be, you know, a Zoom link at the church itself, or you can zoom in from home. So it works either way for that.
Okay,
I wish, I'm sorry, I don't have more information.
Well,
hey Laura, can you type your website in the chat? The
Oh.
Northwest Illinois Audubon website address.
pressure's on,
What?
Let's see here.
the pressure's on.
Yeah.
I know Don Miller, he had hoped to attend this, and I think he had another meeting that he had to go to.
Okay. Yeah, he's the program chair, so
Yeah.
he set everything up.
Oh, that's okay. I just Googled it. I'll put it in there. I got
Okay,
it.
thank you. Yeah, I was gonna have to, I actually don't do much with the website. to be honest with you. We have a newsletter, so I get my information from our newsletters. But check
Okay.
out the website anyhow. Everyone should check it out because we got a lot of good stuff going on.
Yeah, I'm doing that right now. And it's 7 p.m. January 3rd with Sarah Dykman, St. John United Church of Christ Fellowship Hall. Zoom from home or in person. Sarah will be zooming from Mexico.
Hopefully.
All right.
Yeah, I'm like easily an hour and a half from my house. This is the closest internet I could find.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, so.
Well, thanks for making the effort.
Yeah, well,
And it's
thank
a
you,
good
Kim,
connection
for-
too.
Yeah, I found someone with a job who needs good internet. But yeah, thanks Kim for managing the logistic, the details, and thanks again, Mark, for the invitation, and
It was my
thanks
pleasure.
everyone for coming out.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.
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 I'm going to ask Jill.
Yeah.